My father-in-law asked as he lay on the sheets. "Are you washing them properly, Kate?" I shuddered to think that this would become a regular occurrence. These kinds of strange incidents might have been commonplace in my life if we had shared a residence. Even thinking about it makes me uncomfortable. My life took a turn for the worst when I got divorced due to unworkable conflicts about living arrangements. I'm Kate, and I went through a divorce when I was 60 years old. But in spite of what others may think about getting older, I think that, even at 60, life is far from finished. Even learning how to operate a computer, a skill that previously seemed beyond my capabilities, is one I've taken on. I'm not going to allow becoming older stop me from taking on new tasks since I'm learning through literature. I'm not attempting to outdo the younger generation in any way. Instead, I still consider myself to be a child at heart. I've faced my fair share of difficulties in life. 10 years after we bought our house, my husband Tom and I had finally paid off our mortgage when the problem started. When we were almost done with the financing, Tom brought up an old subject. We had purchased the house when we were in our late 20s. "How do you feel about cohabiting?" he inquired. "Cohabiting? By that, what do you mean?" "Even though I already knew," I answered. He clarified, "I mean with my parents." We'd had this conversation before, and my feelings remained the same. "Tom, I believe it would be challenging. I do not get along well with your mother. It will only get worse for us both if we move in together. Right now, everything are going well for me. Unless we try, we won't know how it turns out," he urged. "We cannot simply cease living together once we begin. You should never attempt something novel." Even though Tom had been adamantly opposed to living together prior to the wedding, he had been recommending this ever since we were married. At the time, I was relieved, but after we got married, he started to gradually change his attitude, as though he had been playing tricks on me all along. Later on, I discovered that Jane, his mother, had been begging him, saying, "I'm concerned about the future. Do you not think about us as we get older?" Unbeknownst to me, Tom had grown to feel obligated by filial piety to reside with his parents. I hoped he had known that he could say no. I can see why you would want to look after your parents, but Tom was aware of the conflict between his mother and me. Even still, he didn't seem to be fazed when our relationship grew more tense. His requests to move in together became more frequent and urgent as we approached the last payment on our mortgage. Then the doorbell rang at 7 in the morning on a Sunday. I was surprised to see my mother-in-law, Jane, and father-in-law, Mark, standing there grinning broadly when I answered it. They were surrounded by a light from the early morning sun that nearly gave the picture a hallowed quality. However, I was aware of this. "Welcome back." "Welcome back," greeted Tom, who emerged behind me as I stood there taken aback by their unexpected arrival. I reasoned that typically you say, "Thank you for inviting me," and the host responds, "Welcome." However, I couldn't help but think of Tom's recurring query, "What do you think about living with my parents?" I was no longer able to ignore this since it was unsettling. What was taking place? Returning to the room with my in-laws, I saw Jane closely examining the antique cabinet. I couldn't contain myself and questioned, "What are you doing?" She said in a worried tone, "Oh, there are quite a few scratches here. It is unfortunate to swap it out for a new one. However, Kate, you appear a little awkward. Please take more care with it going forward. How come?" I had selected the cabinet myself, and I looked closely at the areas Jane was indicating and saw no marks. Maybe her aging eyesight was causing her to mistake the natural wood grain for damage. No, I can't see what she's talking about either, even with my old eyes. However, Jane had previously leveled similar unfounded claims. She seemed to find it intolerable that her beloved son would be taken away by a daughter-in-law. I chose to ignore her comments as usual, even though I thought they were unfair. All of a sudden, I realized that Mark had vanished from view. I heard a commotion from the second floor at that very moment. I became aware of what was happening and felt a wave of dread. To my surprise, as I went upstairs, I discovered Mark face down on my bed. Not Tom's. Not in a way. I gasped in surprise. "Kate, are you doing the sheet washing correctly?" Mark inquired, totally unaware of my fear. "Oh my God, no, 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 no!" My voice rising in incredulity, I muttered, "Without a doubt not. Please don't do it to me." I couldn't help but say things more sharply than I had intended. "What is that? A daughter-in-law showing such insolence!" Mark yelled. "My daughter-in-law has nothing to do with this." Disbelieving, I fired back. "What's the reason behind your bed sniffing?" "I just wanted to make sure it was cleaned properly." "That's unnecessary," I cried out. "There is," Mark was adamant. "It's a mandatory check for an incoming resident." With my heart racing, I questioned, "What are you talking about?" "Really?" He murmured, "I'm already nervous about having a daughter-in-law who acts so impolite. Cohabiting jointly?" As soon as Mark said those words, the unexpected reality of them struck me, and I felt my entire world tilt. I watched in disbelief as Tom and Jane materialized behind me. Notwithstanding the tension in the room, Tom remarked, "It's noisy here, so this is where everyone is." "Your father is discussing cohabitation," I managed to utter, my voice faltering. Tom questioned nonchalantly, "What's that about?" With a pit in my gut, I questioned, "What do you mean by that?" Tom stated, "This month we paid off the house mortgage, so we've decided to move in with my parents." "How come? You made that decision by yourself?" I cried out, my incredulity giving way to rage. "Have I been inquiring about cohabitation for some time now?" As though this was a plausible justification, Tom said. And I declined. I snapped back, fury in my eyes. I can't live with someone who goes around sniffing people's sheets. "Did you respond to what Mark said with that statement?" With a bewildered look on his face, Tom questioned. I tightly balled my fists, attempting to control my feelings. "Don't worry about it," Jane interjected in a sickeningly beautiful voice. "Your role is over now that the mortgage has been paid off." She flashed a big smile, as though she'd just made an amazing announcement. "What?" Unable to believe what I was hearing, I shot back. "That's correct." Mark threw in a sarcastic remark and waved me off. "You're not required anymore. You are free to leave." A chilly understanding swept over me. Thus, it was as it was. I had been nothing more than a wallet to help pay off the mortgage for years. Jane had been keeping a careful eye on our lives, waiting patiently, and never losing up on her desire to live with us. She thought she could have her cherished son back now that the mortgage was paid off in full, and I could be written off like yesterday's news. Fury bubbled up inside me as the full extent of their manipulation became clear. Certainly, I bore some responsibility for letting things get to this point, but this house was important to me too. There was no reason for me to be subjected to so much distress. But then, in a flash of inspiration, I remembered something, a fact that suddenly wiped away my despair and irritation. "All right then, that's fine," I said calmly, surprising even myself. Tom's eyes widened in shock at my unexpectedly smooth response. He had clearly never imagined that I would agree so easily. Perhaps Tom thought I would beg to stay or reconsider, but I was resolute up until the moment. I left the house. He kept suggesting, "Won't you reconsider?" But I stood my ground. Ultimately, we divorced amicably. A month after the divorce, while I was enjoying the freedom of living in a hotel, having lost my place to live, I received a message from Jane, my former mother-in-law. She insisted on meeting me. Although I found it bothersome, I agreed, slightly hopeful as I had an inkling of what it might be about. When I arrived at the cafe where we had agreed to meet, I found Jane and the rest of the family, including Tom, sitting with gloomy expressions. As soon as she saw me, Jane's eyes welled up with tears. "Kate, thank you for coming," she said, her voice shaky. "What brings everyone together? Is there something you need from me?" I asked, curious but wary. "Actually, we received the notice of the division of assets from you yesterday," Jane began. "Well, yes, it's only natural to proceed with the division of assets since we're divorced," I replied, maintaining a neutral tone. "Yes, but the situation has changed a bit from before," she continued, looking even more despondent. "How so?" I asked, sensing that something more was at play. My question seemed to dishearten them even further. "Tom's company went under," Jane finally admitted. I clapped my hands together with a smile. "I saw that coming. It was only a matter of time." "What do you mean by a matter of time?" Jane asked, her voice changing with disbelief. In recent years, Tom's salary had been decreasing, and there were signs like delayed payments last month. Those are typical precursors to a company's bankruptcy. "How could you not see it?" I responded sharply. Jane, who should have had Tom's best interest at heart, asked angrily, "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" Tom flinched in fear, clearly rattled by the conversation. "I never thought it would actually go under," he mumbled. "Normally you'd notice such signs," I retorted, incredulous at their obliviousness. "Eh?" Tom stammered, surprised by my response. I immediately pressed, "So you didn't gather us here just to say that Tom lost his job, did you?" "What's the real reason we're here?" Everyone fell silent momentarily, lost for words. Finally, Tom spoke up. "The truth is, our house burned down. That was caused by my father's smoking. We suffered a huge loss because we decided to live with my parents." Stunned, I took a moment to process the gravity of their situation. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. I had indeed anticipated Tom losing his job when I decided to divorce him. I was unwilling to continue supporting a self-centered, jobless husband. Moreover, if we had lived together, I would have likely struggled with the pensioner lifestyle of my in-laws and possibly the burden of their care. Divorce seemed like the best choice for me. However, I hadn't anticipated Mark burning down the house. This was turning into quite the story to tell. "I'm sorry to hear that, but it really is a tough situation," I said, masking my amusement. "Now that my parents have also lost their home, they have nowhere to live and don't know where to start," Tom explained. "So you've become both homeless and jobless?" I remarked, unable to resist pointing out the irony. "Please stop saying it like that," Tom pleaded. "I'm technically homeless too, since I'm living in a hotel at the moment." I continued, "But I've bought a new house, so I'll be moving out of that status soon." The shock on their faces was priceless. Time to enjoy their reaction. "Do you know the high-rise condominium near the station? I'll be starting my new life there soon." A high-rise condominium? The mention of it instantly changed their expressions. It seemed a high-rise was a symbol of luxury and aspiration for them. My choice to live there wasn't out of desire for prestige, but for a secure and convenient living environment. After the divorce, I wasn't even interested in the view at all. I chose a lower floor to avoid the hassle of waiting for elevators. "We'd like to live there too, Kate. Can you forget about the past and let us live with you?" Jane asked, desperation in her voice. "That would be great, Kate. Please." Though I had half expected it, I couldn't hide my astonishment at their audacity. Asking to live with their recently divorced former daughter-in-law? Could it be that Mark intends to bring calamity even to a high-rise condominium? "I'd like to help, but I'm no longer necessary to you all. Remember, I was just a wallet to you," I said, my words dripping with sarcasm. "Actually, We've always highly valued your skills around the house, they claimed, backtracking quickly. The house felt brighter with you around, Kate. You're considerate, beautiful, and incomparable to our son. Now that he's unemployed, he's beyond our control. Their son stood silently amidst the groaning, clearly uncomfortable. It seemed that no matter how beloved a son, if he couldn't support them, he was no longer of use to them. What terrible parents. Well, if we all lived together, it might not be so bad, I said, feeding consideration, prompting shocked expressions from my in-laws and Tom. It could be more fun than I thought. What do you mean by that, Kate? Tom asked, his confusion evident. I mean it quite literally, I replied, my smile seemingly lifting everyone's spirits. However, facing my ex-husband again felt a bit awkward. Well, if that's the case, Jane interjected cheerfully, don't worry about it. Tom doesn't have to live with Kate. Tom looked surprised. What? Why not? Mark added, that's right. Tom should live somewhere else. We'll take advantage of Kate's generosity. Why am I the only one left out? Tom protested. You don't have an income, Mark explained. We have our pensions, so we can contribute to food, but you can't. I really wanted to point out that moving into a high-rise and thinking food expenses would cover everything was naive, but I chose to stay silent and watched as the family conflict unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Then why don't you, who have a pension, rent another place? I suggested. You've lost your job, and we can't afford such frivolous spending. What if something happens? Mark countered. What are you talking about? We're still young, one of them retorted. Elderly people should, Tom cut him off. How disrespectful. We still have our youth. If you're so young, then work and use that income for the future, I shot back. I can't even take a bath or go to job interviews in this situation, Tom shot back. You can always wash yourself in the river, came the reply. Always thinking about yourself, another added. Huh, you say that as if you do anything yourself, was the sharp comeback. Who's a failure? Tom shot back. We don't need such a useless son anymore. Jane attempted to mediate, asking, Are you really okay with this? But Tom's reaction only seemed to infuriate Mark further, showing no signs of backing down. Turning to me with a smirk, Mark said, This means we'll have more room, right? We're almost excited about starting a new life in the high-rise. Are you misunderstanding something? My cheerful smile seemed to confuse everyone. The size of the room is fixed from the start. I have no intention of living with you. What do you mean, Kate? Jane asked, clearly frustrated. You only mentioned that living with many people might be lively, but you never said we'd actually live together. That was the impression you gave, Jane argued. It's good to see you, who abandoned your husband, living in a high-rise, finally being seen for who you are. You've always looked down on me, and now it's clear you want nothing to do with us. Even after your house burned down, Jane added, her tone sharp. With a stern look in their direction, Tom stated, Kate is correct. I believe that obeying my parents was the proper course of action, but it appears that they are not very concerned about me. Tom's statements left the in-laws astonished, and their emotions changed as they took in the truth of what had happened. With a shaky voice, Tom said, I was wrong. Let's cancel the disarmament. So, Dad, you just want to rely on your son again because you can't live with me, right? I questioned, sarcasm seeping from my voice. No, that's not it at all, he stumbled, blushing. Seeing this, Mark, who had struck the mark, flustered. Tom's forehead was starting to reveal veins of rage. I refuse, he yelled. Parents like you? I answered, disarmament is fine with me. The in-laws begged Tom to listen now that they were in a panic, but he would not hear them. Thanks to you, I really want to start over, he replied, turning to face me. Are you serious? Are you really real? Sickened, I questioned. I mean business. I'm awake now because of what you did, Tom remarked. You still have feelings for me, but stop with that hopeful nonsense, I responded. My only thought was that it would be funny if the man who left his wife for his parents ended up fighting with them after all the cozy family attempts. I've simply considered you to be a tool for dividing up property. Property division? Tom repeated himself. You still plan to claim that from me in this situation? I stated. I couldn't care less. I signed the divorce papers quickly because I wanted to go, of course, but I still have the right to my fair portion of the divided property after the divorce. Be ready. Wait, don't you really love me? Tom pleaded incoherently. How can I love someone who has no place to live or a job? I stated. That's only possible in a fantasy world. Not at all. Unable to win me back, Tom shouted, This can't be happening. Tom became enraged. He became angry and started a ruckus, accusing his parents of being responsible for everything. I left the scene before things got any worse. I got my fair part of the property distribution, just like I promised. Though it wasn't much, it was the last of my friendship with Tom. He was now living a difficult life, struggling with diminished income and becoming distant from his parents. He experimented with day labor and lived a nomadic existence, spending nights in inexpensive hotels or parks. Due to his advanced age, he had trouble finding steady employment, and his parents appeared to have given up on him in favor of their pensions without making an effort to patch things up between them. Tom's parents continued to be a self-centered marriage for years to come. From my end, I was able to live somewhat comfortably because to investments I started before to the divorce. I have started going to a local class to improve my programming abilities. I appreciate the relationship with my classmates, even though the majority of them are kids. It's refreshing. Even though I'm childless, I feel like I've gained a lot of grandchildren. During breaks, a little girl named Livy has been studying from me after expressing interest in me. Soon, more kids started participating, fostering a friendly, lively environment. I'm committed to be true to myself and continue to have a pleasant and rewarding life, despite my varied life experiences.
During a family trip to the lake, we were boating when suddenly my cruel husband stopped the boat. My ruthless husband and mother-in-law forcibly removed my life jacket and said, "Finally, your chapter is over. We'll never see you again." They both pushed me into the lake and left me to die as they moved away. However, I survived bravely and saved my life. The very next day, I returned and gave them a shocking surprise when they woke up. My name is Sarah Miller, and for a while, I thought I was living a dream life. I married James, my college sweetheart, the man I thought I'd grow old with. I fell for him in my sophomore year. He was charming, thoughtful, and made me feel like the most important person in the world. After graduation, we decided to take the next step and got married. I couldn't have been happier. We settled in a cozy home near Lake Tahoe, California. It was beautiful, serene, and everything I imagined our life would be. James worked as a Navy officer, a job that gave him pride and purpose. I admired him for his dedication, and he made me feel so loved in return. His mother, Margaret, was initially very welcoming. Before the wedding, she treated me like a daughter. She would compliment me, share family recipes, and even give me advice about married life. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have such a supportive mother-in-law. But as I was about to learn, appearances can be deceiving. The first year of marriage was blissful. James would come home and talk to me about his day, and we'd plan little outings by the lake on weekends. We both loved boating, and those trips felt like an escape from the world. Margaret would visit occasionally, and she seemed genuinely happy for us. Life felt perfect. But things started to change in the second year of our marriage. It began with subtle comments from Margaret. "Sarah, when are you planning to make me a grandmother?" she'd ask, her tone light but insistent. At first, I laughed it off. "Whenever the time is right, Margaret. We're just enjoying our time together for now." But her remarks became more frequent, and James started echoing them. What was once a casual conversation became a pointed demand. They told me I needed to focus on starting a family, that it was my duty as a wife. I explained that these things couldn't be forced, but they wouldn't listen. "You've got 3 months, Sarah," Margaret finally said one evening, her voice cold. "If you're not pregnant by then, we'll have to reevaluate your place in this family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. James sat silently, avoiding my eyes, as though he agreed with her. I felt like my entire world was shifting beneath me. I loved James deeply and wanted to have children with him someday, but this pressure, this ultimatum, it was suffocating. As I tried to process their growing hostility, I noticed other changes in James. He became distant. The man who once showered me with affection now seemed preoccupied, distracted. I chalked it up to stress from his job, but something in my gut told me it was more than that. Margaret, too, began acting colder toward me. She stopped visiting as often, and, when she did, her warmth was gone. She would criticize little things, how I kept the house, the meals I cooked, my appearance. It felt like I could do nothing right in her eyes. One night, I finally confronted James. "What's happening to us?" I asked, tears brimming in my eyes. "You've changed, James. You're not the man I married." He looked at me with a mix of guilt and frustration. "I'm just under a lot of pressure, Sarah. Margaret is worried about the family's future, and I don't know how to handle it." His words didn't comfort me. They only added to my unease. I started feeling like an outsider in my own marriage, and my once loving home began to feel like a prison. What I didn't know then was that James was hiding a secret, one that would shatter the life I thought we had built together. He was having an affair with Angela Harris, a wealthy businesswoman who had been financing his extravagant lifestyle behind my back. Margaret, ever the schemer, fully supported this relationship. To her, Angela was a better fit for James, richer, more influential. And, together, they were plotting to remove me from the picture entirely. But I didn't suspect any of this at the time. I was still clinging to the hope that we could fix our marriage, that this was just a rough patch. Even when Margaret's demands became crueler and James's affection grew colder, I tried to convince myself that love could conquer all. Then came the day that changed everything. James came home unusually cheerful and suggested a trip to the lake. "You've been so stressed lately," he said, flashing me a smile I hadn't seen in months. "Let's go boating this weekend." Just the 3 of us, you, me, and Mom. I was taken aback, but cautiously hopeful. Maybe he was trying to mend things between us. Maybe this was his way of saying he still cared. I agreed, despite the nagging feeling in my gut that something was off. When the day arrived, I felt a mix of excitement and unease. Margaret, too, was uncharacteristically pleasant, even offering to pack snacks for the trip. We drove to the lake together, and for the first time in months, they seemed almost happy. I wanted to believe it was genuine, but something about their smiles felt forced, calculated. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. I loved boating, and the idea of being out on the water was enough to lift my spirits. We rented a small boat, and James handed each of us a life jacket. "Safety first," he said with a grin. I smiled back, trying to ignore the strange tension in the air. As the boat set off, I let myself relax, focusing on the gentle waves and the warm sun on my skin. For a brief moment, I felt at peace, but that peace was short-lived. As the boat drifted into deeper waters, James and Margaret's demeanor began to shift. Their cheerful facade cracked, replaced by something darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led into a trap, but I couldn't imagine what was coming next. And then they stopped the boat. "Sarah," James said, his voice chillingly calm, "we need to talk." As the boat came to a stop in the middle of the lake, I felt an icy chill run through me. It wasn't from the water or the breeze. It was the look on James's face. His expression was eerily calm, almost too calm, and Margaret sat beside him, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. "Sarah," James began, looking at me like a stranger, not the man I had loved and married. "We need to talk about your future, or rather, your lack of one." I blinked, trying to process his words. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. Margaret laughed, a cold, harsh sound that made my stomach twist. Oh, don't act surprised, Sarah. You must have noticed by now that you're no longer welcome in this family. My heart pounded in my chest. What are you talking about? I've done everything I can to make this marriage work. James shrugged, his calm demeanor unnerving. It's not enough. Angela is willing to give me a life you never could. She's wealthy, supportive, and ready to start a family. You, on the other hand, are expendable.
Angela.
The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd heard James mention her in passing before, but I had no idea she was part of his life in this way. My mind raced, trying to understand how everything had unraveled so completely. Margaret leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. We've been patient, Sarah, but it's clear you're just wasting our time. It's better for everyone if you're out of the picture. Panic clawed at my chest. Out of the picture? I repeated, my voice shaking. What does that mean? James stood up, his expression darkening. It means this is the end for you. Before I could react, he grabbed me by the shoulders, pulling me to my feet. I struggled against him, but Margaret joined in, her hands ripping at the straps of my life jacket. I screamed, begging them to stop, but they only laughed, cold, heartless laughter that made my blood run cold. Goodbye, Sarah, Margaret sneered as she yanked the life jacket off me.
No.
Please, I shouted, tears streaming down my face. Don't do this. I'll leave, I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. But they didn't care. Together, they shoved me over the side of the boat. I hit the water with a splash, the cold instantly biting into my skin. I flailed, trying to keep my head above the surface as I watched the boat drift farther away. James and Margaret stood at the edge, their figures silhouetted against the sun. They were laughing. She can't swim, Margaret said smugly. It's over. My heart sank as I realized their plan. They thought I'd drown, that I'd never make it to shore. But they had underestimated me. What they didn't know was that I loved swimming. It was one of the reasons I had always loved boating. Despite the shock and fear coursing through me, I forced myself to focus. I took deep breaths, calming my racing heart. I knew panicking would only make things worse. I started swimming, keeping my strokes steady and strong, pushing through the water with every ounce of strength I had. The shore seemed impossibly far, but I refused to give up. As I swam, I heard the sound of another boat in the distance. I turned my head and saw two people, a man and a woman, staring in my direction. They were too far away to hear me, but they could see what had happened. One of them raised a phone, pointing it toward James's boat, which was now speeding away. I kept swimming, my arms and legs burning with the effort. I didn't know if I could make it to them, but I didn't have to. The other boat turned toward me, and within moments, I felt strong hands pulling me out of the water. "Are you okay?" the man asked, his voice filled with concern. I couldn't speak. I was gasping for air, shaking from the cold and the shock of what had just happened. The woman handed me a blanket, wrapping it around my shoulders as tears streamed down my face. "They tried to kill me," I finally managed to choke out. "My husband and his mother, they threw me into the lake. They thought I'd drown." The man's expression hardened. "I saw everything," he said. "We have it on video. Don't worry. We'll make sure they pay for this." His words gave me a glimmer of hope, a small light in the darkness. They told me their names: Andrew and Emily Carter. Andrew was a lawyer, and Emily was his sister. They had been out on the lake enjoying a quiet day when they witnessed the horrifying scene. "We're taking you to shore," Andrew said firmly. "You'll be safe. And I'll make sure those two never get away with this." As the boat sped toward land, I clutched the blanket tightly around me, my mind racing. My husband, the man I had trusted with my life, had just tried to take it away. Margaret, who I had once thought of as a second mother, had been complicit in it all. I felt a mix of anger, heartbreak, and determination. They had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, but I was still here. And I wasn't going to let them win. When we reached the shore, Andrew and Emily helped me to their car and drove me to my parents' house. My parents were shocked when they saw me, soaking wet, shaking, and crying uncontrollably. I told them everything, from the betrayal to the attack on the boat. My father's face turned red with anger, while my mother hugged me tightly, sobbing into my shoulder. "We'll fight this," my father said, his voice firm. "They won't get away with what they've done." Andrew nodded. "With the video evidence we have, we can build a strong case. Justice will be served." That night, as I lay in bed, my mind kept replaying the events on the boat. The betrayal, the laughter, the coldness in their eyes. It was a nightmare I couldn't escape. But I also thought about Andrew and Emily, about the video evidence they had captured. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. James and Margaret had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. Now it was my turn to fight back. The morning after that horrifying night, I woke up at my parents' house, still shaken but determined. I couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal, the coldness in James's eyes, and Margaret's cruel laugh. The memories haunted me, but I wasn't going to let them win. They thought they had silenced me forever, but I was alive, and I would make sure they faced justice. Andrew Carter, the lawyer who had saved me, arrived that morning with his sister Emily. They had spent the night reviewing the video evidence and preparing a plan. Andrew's confidence gave me strength. "Sarah," he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "the video we have is solid evidence. It clearly shows James and Margaret pushing you overboard, and their laughter afterward proves intent. This isn't just an accident, it's a premeditated crime." Hearing those words made my stomach turn, but I nodded. "What do we do next?" "We filed charges immediately," Andrew said. "We'll accuse them of attempted murder and conspiracy. This is a serious case, and with the evidence we have, the law is on your side." My parents supported me completely. My father, ever the protective parent, was furious. "They deserve to rot in prison for what they've done," he said through gritted teeth. My mother, meanwhile, held my hand and kept repeating, "You're so strong, Sarah. We're here for you." We went to the police station later that day to file the charges. Andrew accompanied us, his briefcase full of documentation and the video on a USB drive. When we explained the situation to the officers, they were horrified. The detective assigned to the case, Detective Collins, took our statements and promised swift action. "This video will make all the difference," he said. "We'll start by bringing them in for questioning." For the first time since the attack, I felt a sense of power returning to me. James and Margaret had treated me like I was disposable, but they had underestimated me. I wasn't going to hide or let fear paralyze me. I would confront them head-on. The next few days were a whirlwind. The police arrested James and Margaret at their home. I wasn't there to see it, but Detective Collins told me that both of them looked stunned. They hadn't expected me to survive, let alone take legal action. I could only imagine the looks on their faces when they saw the evidence against them. The case moved quickly. Andrew worked tirelessly, preparing every detail. He explained the legal process to me step by step, making sure I felt informed and empowered. We were charging them with attempted murder, and Andrew was confident we had a strong case. When the court date arrived, I was nervous but determined. As I walked into the courtroom, I saw James and Margaret sitting at the defendant's table. Their expressions were a mix of shock and defiance. It was clear they hadn't expected to see me alive, much less ready to testify against them. Andrew started by presenting the video evidence. The room went silent as the footage played. The sound of their laughter as they threw me overboard sent chills through everyone in the courtroom. The prosecutor pointed out how their actions were premeditated, deliberate, and heartless. James's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that they had panicked and thought I was already dead when they left the scene. But the video and my testimony painted a very different picture. The jury could see through their lies. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. I described the years of emotional abuse, the ultimatum they gave me, and how I had trusted them right up until the moment they tried to kill me. "James was the man I thought I'd spend my life with," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "And Margaret, she was like a second mother to me. But they betrayed me in the worst way possible. They tried to end my life because I didn't fit into their plans anymore. But I'm still here, and I'm here to make sure they face the consequences of their actions. The courtroom was silent as I finished. I could see the jury members exchanging glances, their expressions grim. James and Margaret avoided looking at me, their once confident demeanor crumbling. Andrew's closing argument was powerful. He emphasized the cruelty and calculation behind their actions, and how they had underestimated me. He painted a clear picture of two people who thought they were untouchable, but who had been caught red-handed. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. The video, the witness testimony from Andrew and Emily, and my own account left no room for doubt. I could see James and Margaret growing more desperate with each passing day. Finally, the jury reached a verdict, guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced both of them to life imprisonment without parole for their premeditated attempt on my life. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Justice had been served. James and Margaret had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. They would spend the rest of their lives paying for what they had done. As I left the courtroom that day, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and triumph. They had taken so much from me, but they hadn't taken my will to fight. I was still standing, and I was ready to rebuild my life. When the trial ended and the verdict was announced, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. James and Margaret had been found guilty, and their sentence, life imprisonment, was a testament to their cruelty and the justice they deserved. But even as the weight lifted off my shoulders, the scars they left behind were still there. Leaving the courtroom, I was greeted by my parents, Andrew and Emily. They embraced me tightly, their support a reminder that I wasn't alone in this battle. Andrew, who had been my pillar of strength throughout the trial, smiled and said, "You did it, Sarah. You stood up for yourself, and now they'll never hurt you again." I nodded, tears in my eyes. "I couldn't have done it without all of you. You saved my life, not just on that boat, but in every way after." The weeks that followed were a mix of healing and reflection. I stayed with my parents for a while, allowing myself the time to process everything. The betrayal I had experienced still stung, but I refused to let it define me. I began seeing a counselor to help me work through the trauma, and with each session, I felt a little stronger. Andrew and Emily remained close friends, checking in on me regularly. One day, Andrew visited with some news. "I thought you should know," he said. "James and Margaret tried to appeal the sentence, but the court denied it. They're going to serve their full time." I felt a surge of vindication. "Good," I said firmly. "They deserve to pay for what they did." As the months went by, I started to rebuild my life. I returned to my hobbies, especially boating. It was strange at first. I had to confront my fears and remind myself that the lake wasn't my enemy. It was a place I loved, a part of my life that James and Margaret couldn't take away from me. Slowly, I reclaimed it. I also began exploring new opportunities. I went back to school to study counseling, inspired by the help I had received during my recovery. I wanted to support others who had faced similar betrayals, to be a beacon of hope for those who felt lost. One evening, as I sat by the lake watching the sunset, Emily joined me. She handed me a small notebook. "What's this?" I asked, flipping it open. "A journal," she said with a smile. "You've been through so much, Sarah. Maybe writing it down will help you find closure." I took her advice and began writing my story. The love I thought I had, the betrayal, the survival, and the justice I fought for. Each page felt like a step toward healing, a way to make sense of everything I had endured. In time, I realized that while James and Margaret had taken so much from me, they hadn't taken everything. They hadn't taken my resilience, my determination, or my ability to start over. I was still standing, stronger than ever. Looking back now, I see my story not as one of betrayal, but of survival and triumph. I've learned that even in the darkest moments, there's always a path forward. I've found new purpose, surrounded by people who truly care for me. James and Margaret are where they belong, and I'm free, free to live, free to love, and free to be the person I was always meant to be.
My earliest memories are like melancholic blue-tinted snapshots. Dad, a figure in a faded photograph tucked away in a dusty album, left before I turned 5. Mom, Scarlet, became a storm cloud hovering over our tiny apartment. One moment she'd be frantically scrubbing the kitchen floor, muttering about starting fresh. The next, she'd scoop me into a crushing hug, her grip so tight it left me breathless. These suffocating embraces, though infrequent, were the only displays of affection I craved. Mostly, I was a small shadow trailing behind her. She'd flit about the apartment, her face etched with a worry that seemed to have a life of its own. Sometimes, when the worry lines deepened and her brow furrowed, she'd leave me with Mrs. Willow downstairs. When Mom finally returned, the tension would crackle in the air like static electricity. She'd ruffle my hair with a distracted sigh, a gesture that felt more obligatory than loving. Then, a fleeting smile would flicker across her face, a glimpse of the warmth I desperately craved. Mom started dating again. Carter, a man with eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed, entered our lives. Unlike the whirlwind that was Mom, he moved with a gentle calm. He treated me with a kindness that felt foreign in our tense household. One day, after a particularly humiliating incident with Orla Roger and her posy at school, I found myself clinging to him on the couch, tears blurring my vision. "Why do they always pick on me?" I mumbled into his shirt. The familiar ache of loneliness constricted my chest. He knelt before me, his eyes reflecting a concern I wasn't used to seeing from adults. "They pick on you because they're insecure," he said softly, wiping away a stray tear. "They want to feel powerful by making others feel small." His words were a balm to my wounded spirit. In that moment, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. But hope in my world was a fragile butterfly, easily crushed. Then came Nancy, a tiny bundle of joy with eyes that mirrored Mom's. She arrived a year later. Suddenly, I wasn't the center of attention anymore. All the warmth, all the affection, seemed to evaporate, replaced by a cold indifference. Mom's focus shifted entirely to Nancy, leaving me to navigate the confusing world of childhood alone. 14 awkward braces, a permanent frizz halo around my head, and a knot of insecurity the size of Texas tightening in my gut. It was also the age when my mom's negativity towards me bloomed into a full-blown weed garden. Take picture day at school, for instance. Mom took the day off work to fuss over Nancy's pigtails and pick out the perfect sparkly dress. When it came to my turn, a sigh escaped her lips as she rummaged through my closet. "Ugh, nothing decent in here," she muttered. Of course, when picture day arrived, Nancy looked like a little princess, and I resembled a rumpled dandelion compared to her sunflower. Mom fawned over Nancy's photo, while mine got a cursory glance and a dismissive grunt. Carter, bless his kind heart, tried to be the positive voice in my life. He'd take me shopping sometimes, helping me pick out clothes that actually fit and flattered me. One day, after a particularly frustrating day with Mom, I found myself clinging to him, the need for comfort overwhelming. "Dad," the word slipped out before I could stop it. He froze, then a pained expression crossed his face. Mom appeared in the doorway, her eyes blazing. "You have one father, Rosie," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "And trust me, he deserves you." Her words stung like a slap. Carter, sensing the tension, awkwardly ruffled my hair. "Look, it's okay," he mumbled. "It's not okay," I choked out, tears welling up in my eyes. Nancy, who had been watching the whole scene unfold with a smug expression, suddenly piped up. "Rosie's been bad again, Daddy. She took my candy without asking." 16, the land of first crushes, awkward dances, and a constant knot of nerves in my stomach. Dating, however, was a minefield in my house. Mom had a knack for sabotaging any potential romance before it even sprouted legs. Take Steve, for example. Tall, funny, and with a smile that could melt glaciers, he was everything a teenage girl could dream of. After weeks of nervous texts and stolen glances, I finally gathered the courage to ask him out. He said yes. Excitement bubbled in my chest, a feeling quickly replaced with dread at the thought of him meeting Mom. The night of our date, Mom went into overdrive. She fussed over Nancy's bedtime story, making sure it stretched on for an eternity. When Steve finally arrived, looking nervous but sweet, Mom greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rosie never cleans her room," she announced casually, as if discussing the weather. "You might find socks and pizza boxes under that mountain of clothes." My cheeks burned like they were on fire. Steve gave a nervous chuckle, but the awkward silence stretched like a bad joke. The rest of the evening was a disaster. Mom kept making snide remarks about my weight, my taste in music, even my choice of college. By the end of the night, Steve practically ran out the door, leaving me feeling like a deflated balloon. The story repeated itself with a few unfortunate guys after that. Each time I brought someone home, Mom would turn into a master of backhanded compliments and subtle digs. My self-confidence took a nosedive, and any potential relationship fizzled out faster than a wet firecracker. 18, the age of college applications, nervous goodbyes, and a fierce determination to break free from the suffocating grip of my childhood. Senior year became my mission control, a strategic plan to launch myself into a world where Mom's negativity couldn't reach me. College applications became my weapon of choice. I spent hours hunched over the kitchen table, pouring my heart and dreams onto those pristine white pages. Every acceptance letter was a victory, a tiny shard of hope chipping away at the wall Mom had built around me. Of course, she didn't make it easy. When I announced my acceptance to a university across the state, her reaction was a masterpiece of passive aggression. "Oh, Rosie," she sighed, shaking her head. "So far away. How will we ever see each other?" It was a question loaded with guilt, but I wasn't falling for it anymore. "We can video chat, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "Besides, there are these things called airplanes." Carter, my ever-supportive anchor, was thrilled for me. "This is amazing, Rosie," he beamed, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you." His words were a warm hug on a cold day. He may not have been my dad by blood, but he felt more like one than the man who walked out on us all those years ago. College was a revelation. Surrounded by people who didn't know my family history, I finally felt like I could breathe. I blossomed in a sea of new experiences, challenging myself academically, and forging friendships that felt genuine and supportive. 27, the land of adulting, spreadsheets that never seemed to end, and a tiny apartment that felt like a palace compared to my cramped childhood bedroom. Life, for the most part, was good. My job as an economist kept my brain buzzing, and Michael, my amazing boyfriend for the past few years, brought warmth and laughter into my life I hadn't known before. One evening, over takeout Thai food and a bottle of wine, Michael dropped a bombshell. "So," he said, looking at me with that goofy grin I adored, "I think it's time we met each other's parents." My stomach lurched. Meeting Michael's folks was easy, a breeze even. They lived in a cozy house with a backyard that smelled like freshly cut grass, and they welcomed me with open arms. His mom, Sarah, practically smothered me in hugs, and his dad, Michael, spent the entire evening cracking jokes that had me snorting into my napkin. They were warm, funny, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. It felt normal, a word I never dared associate with family dinners in my past life. But the thought of Michael meeting my, well, interesting family filled me with dread. How could I explain the years of emotional neglect, the constant jabs, the suffocating negativity? I told him everything, the fights, the tears, the way Mom had chipped away at my self-esteem for years. Nancy, unsurprisingly, hadn't gotten any better. now a master manipulator who knew exactly how to push my buttons. Michael listened patiently, his hand resting gently on mine. "Rosie," he said firmly, "I'm marrying you, not your family. They may be baggage, but you're the prize." His words were a balm to my soul, a declaration of love that washed away years of doubt. Maybe, just maybe, I could finally build a happy family of my own, one filled with love, acceptance, and laughter, the kind of family I'd always longed for. I never had, but the kind I always deserved. My stomach twisted tighter than a pretzel as I dialed Carter's number. This was it, D-Day for breaking the news about Michael and the engagement. "Hey, Rosie, what's up?" Carter's familiar voice boomed through the phone. "Hey, Carter," I said, taking a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you." I launched into the story, spilling the beans about Michael, the proposal, and the upcoming wedding. There was a comfortable silence on the other end of the line, then a genuine laugh erupted. "Rosie, that's fantastic. I'm so happy for you both." His words washed over me like a warm wave, easing some of the anxiety. Nodding my insights, "Listen," he continued, "you've got to bring him over for dinner. Let me meet the guy who finally snagged you." Michael, bless his supportive heart, was all for it. So, a few weeks later, we found ourselves pulling up to my childhood home, a place that still held a strange mix of nostalgia and dread. Mom answered the door, her face breaking into a surprised smile. "Rosie, you came to visit, and who is this handsome fella?" "Mom, this is Michael, my fiancé," I said, offering a tight smile. Michael stepped forward, extending a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Turner," Mom beamed, shaking his hand a little too enthusiastically. "The pleasure's all mine, dear." "So, Michael, what do you do for a living?" Michael, oblivious to the undercurrent of Mom's question, launched into a detailed explanation of his work as a director at a large company. Carter, ever the smooth operator, chimed in with jokes and stories, keeping the conversation flowing. Nancy, of course, wasn't about to be outdone. She spent the entire meal batting her eyelashes at Michael, interrupting our conversations to pepper him with questions about his job and hobbies. Mom, ever the doting mother, fawned over Nancy's every word, a stark contrast to the thinly veiled barb she kept throwing my way. "Rosie, honey," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "you really should take some fashion tips from Nancy. That dress you're wearing, well, it's not exactly flattering." Michael thankfully seemed oblivious to the digs, but I knew exactly what Mom was doing. She was suddenly putting me down, making me feel insecure right in front of my fiancé. The entire dinner felt like a twisted performance, a play where I was constantly reminded of how I wasn't good enough, not pretty enough, not successful enough. By the time dessert rolled around, I was ready to run screaming. As soon as it was polite, we made our excuses and left. The moment we were safely buckled into the car, Michael let out a long sigh. "Your mom, she's a character, isn't she?" he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Yeah," I muttered, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. "She can be." He squeezed my hand gently. "But hey, we made it through dinner, right?" He was right, we had. And even with Mom's negativity hanging in the air like a bad smell, the simple act of holding Michael's hand filled me with a sense of strength and purpose. This was my future. The future I was building with him, not with my dysfunctional family. The warm glow of post-decision satisfaction lingered in the air as Michael and I curled up on the couch, poring over wedding magazines. We envisioned a small, intimate ceremony in a charming vineyard surrounded by the people who loved and supported us. It was perfect. Then, the next morning, the dream shattered into a million pieces. My phone buzzed with Michael's name, his usual cheerful ringtone replaced by a ringing that sent a shiver down my spine. "Rosie," he said, his voice tight with a mix of anger and disbelief, "we have a problem." My stomach lurched. What's wrong? He took a deep breath. Your mom. The blood drained from my face. What did she do this time? Michael explained, his words hitting me like punches. Mom, the ever-reliable manipulator, had somehow unearthed his work phone number, and instead of a congratulatory call, she'd unleashed a verbal tirade that would make a sailor blush. Apparently, in her twisted world, I was the epitome of inadequacy, ugly, dull, and lacking any social graces. It didn't stop there. She'd even dragged Dad into it, dredging up his abandonment years ago like a weapon. But the piece de resistance, she'd suggested Michael ditch me and turn his sights on Nancy, claiming my younger sister was the epitome of beauty and brains. Fury boiled up inside me, a hot, venomous rage. How dare she? How dare she try to sabotage my happiness yet again? Michael, bless his heart, was furious too, but he channeled his anger into something unexpected, a plan. A crazy, audacious plan that was equal parts risky and thrilling. We expose her, he said, his jaw clenched. We set a trap. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Michael would call Mom back, pretend to be swayed by her words, and arrange a meeting to discuss this ludicrous proposal. His goal was to record this entire conversation on his phone. Michael made the call, his voice smooth and convincing. Mom, completely oblivious to the web she was about to walk into, readily agreed to meet him for coffee. A nervous laugh bubbled up from my chest. This was it. Operation Momzilla Takedown was a go. The outcome was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let my mother dictate my future any longer. This time, the tables were turning, and I was ready to play for keeps. I decided to attend their meeting. The thought of confronting Mom, especially disguised as a stranger, sent shivers down my spine. But the anger simmering inside me, the anger at her constant negativity and her attempt to sabotage my happiness, was a powerful motivator. Back in my comfy jeans and a worn-out t-shirt, I slipped into a corner booth at a bustling cafe across the street from our designated meeting spot. Thick black glasses perched on my nose completed the disguise, transforming me into a nondescript observer. Butterflies danced a frenetic jig in my stomach as I watched Mom saunter into the cafe, a triumphant smile plastered on her face. She spotted Michael at the prearranged table in a private room, her smile widening further. This was it. Operation Momzilla Takedown was officially underway. Michael, bless his tech-savvy heart, had discreetly turned on the dictaphone on his phone. Me? Well, I heard their entire conversation in the immediate vicinity. Their conversation started innocently enough, Michael playing the part of the interested suitor. Then, Mom, completely ignoring his phone, launched into her diatribe. You know, Michael, she began, leaning in conspiratorially, between you and me, Rosie just isn't wife material. My blood ran cold. The woman who was supposed to be my mother, the woman who was supposed to love and support me, was bad-mouthing me to a complete stranger. She's, well, a bit simple, Mom continued, her voice laced with fake sympathy. Not very pretty either, if you know what I mean. Michael, to his credit, kept his face impassive, simply nodding along and murmuring non-committal phrases. Inside, I knew he must be fuming. But Nancy, Mom's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, now that's a girl with potential. Smart, beautiful, knows how to handle herself in society. The audacity of it all. Nancy, with her airhead personality and complete lack of work ethic, was apparently the epitome of elegance and intelligence according to Mom. The conversation continued, a masterclass in manipulation and deceit. Mom, blinded by her own delusions, even confessed to never loving my stepfather, claiming she'd only married him for his money. The woman had no shame. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mom stood up, her face radiating self-satisfaction. Well, Michael, it was lovely meeting you. Think about what I said, she purred, patting his hand with a perfectly manicured nail as she walked out of the cafe. I could only shake my head in disbelief. So, what now? I asked, my voice tight. Michael pulled me into a hug, his touch a source of comfort amidst the swirling storm of emotions. Now, he said, his voice firm, we expose her. The air crackled with tension as I walked into my childhood home that weekend. Mom's smile was a mile wide, radiating a smugness that set my teeth on edge. Rosie, honey, you won't believe it, she gushed, the words tumbling out before I even had a chance to say hello. What's that, Mom? I asked, already bracing myself for a bombshell. Michael, she declared, her voice dripping with sickening satisfaction, decided to see reason. He's leaving you and marrying Nancy. My heart did a little stutter, but I forced a smile. That's great, Mom, really happy for them. My stepdad, bless his perpetually confused soul, cleared his throat, leaving her. But I thought they were getting married, he interjected. Nancy, who had been lounging on the couch like a pampered cat, snorted a laugh. Apparently not, Dad. Rosie just wasn't good enough for him. Shocker. I ignored her snide remarks, my eyes locked on Mom's triumphant face. It was showtime. Actually, Mom, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, Michael's right here. Just then, Michael walked in, a sly grin plastered on his face. His presence sent a collective gasp echoing through the room. Hi, everyone, he said, his voice smiling, just in time for a little family fun. He pulled out his phone and pressed play. The room fell silent as Mom's voice, dripping with malice, filled the air. The conversation from the cafe played in its entirety, her diatribe about me, her praise for Nancy, the shocking confession about my stepfather. The color drained from Mom's face with each passing sentence. Stepdad turned a shade of pale white, his jaw slack with disbelief. As for Nancy, her bravado crumbled, replaced by a terrified whimper. When the recording ended, a deathly silence descended upon the room. Then, my stepfather exploded. You lying snake, he roared, his voice shaking with fury. You married me for money all these years. Mom, for the first time in my life, looked genuinely lost, tears welling up in her eyes. But they were overshadowed by the storm brewing in my stepfather's face. I want a divorce, he declared, his voice thick with anger. Get a lawyer. The room imploded. Mom and Nancy burst into tears, their wails a cacophony of misery and self-pity. Michael, bless his heart, looked as comfortable as a fish out of water caught in a hurricane. Amidst the chaos, I felt a strange sense of calm. The truth, ugly and raw, was finally out in the open, the years of unspoken hurt, the manipulation, the lies. It all spilled out, shattering the facade of our dysfunctional family. The following weeks were a blur of tear-choked sobs from my stepdad and icy stares from Nancy whenever our paths crossed at the grocery store. Mom, the architect of this whole mess, retreated into a self-imposed social media blackout. As for me, I felt strangely hollow, the anger that had fueled me for so long was gone, leaving a gaping hole that needed filling. One sunny afternoon, Michael found me curled up on the couch, mindlessly flipping through wedding magazines that now seemed like dusty relics from a bygone era. Hey, he said, his voice laced with concern, you all right? I managed a weak smile. Yeah, just thinking. Everything just feels so different. He squeezed onto the couch beside me, pulling me into a hug. It is, he admitted, but hey, different can be good. A chance to start fresh, you know. His words were a gentle nudge in the right direction. Maybe he was right. Maybe the mom-shaped void in my life could be filled with something new, something exciting. A spark ignited in my chest. So, I said, a mischievous glint in my eyes, what do you say we do something crazy? Michael's eyebrows shot up. Crazy like what? How about a road trip? I suggested, a grin spreading across my face. Just us, a map, and the open road. No expectations, no timelines, just pure adventure. You had me at road trip, he declared. And so, our plans took a sharp turn. The meticulously planned vineyard ceremony morphed into a spontaneous cross-country adventure. We packed a beat-up camper van with essentials, copious snacks, a killer playlist, and a well-worn copy of On the Road, and hit the road with no destination in mind, only the promise of new experiences and shared memories. Fast forward a year, and Michael and I were standing at the altar, exchanging vows under a canopy of fragrant flowers. It wasn't the elaborate ceremony I'd once envisioned, but it was perfect. Instead of a disapproving mother, my stepdad, recently divorced and estranged from Nancy, walked me down the aisle. The tears in his eyes were a mixture of pride and regret, and as he squeezed my hand, he muttered, "You know, kiddo, I always knew you'd find your happily ever after." Life after the wedding settled into a comfortable rhythm. Michael and I built a life together filled with laughter, love, and the occasional road trip adventure. My stepdad became a regular visitor, regaling us with stories from his travels and dropping not-so-subtle hints about wanting to be a grandpa. With a laugh, I'd reply, "Don't worry, you'll be the best grandpa ever."
Right after the funeral of my father-in-law, I noticed my husband, Ted, who had dressed rather youthfully and meticulously for the occasion, and then, hello, a woman in a short dress above the knee, wearing a light-colored outfit. What? You suddenly felt like seeing your own father, doesn't seem like it. I wouldn't do such a thing, you know. I see, then, what are you here for? And who is this person? She's my girlfriend. We're getting married, so let's get a divorce. I'll pay you alimony. There's not a penny left, though? What? Ted thought he would inherit all of his father's assets, but actually, I am Lucy. After graduating from junior college, I have worked as a preschool teacher for 25 years. I lost my parents in an accident during my first year working. And the only reliable person left was Ted, my husband of 20 years, and our son named Kevin. Ted was a teacher at an elementary school, and I had been living busy lives, working together. When Kevin turned 20, he moved to a dormitory near his university campus, citing the distance from the campus as a reason, so now it was just Ted and I living together. Our marriage was neither particularly good nor bad. We never had big arguments. But due to our busy lives, our relationship wasn't very demanding either. However, I found this distance between us comfortable, and on days off, Ted would take care of and adore our child, allowing us to live peacefully despite our busy schedules. Ted had lost his mother early and was raised by his father. Unusually for those times, his father never remarried, worked hard, and managed both housework and child-rearing on his own. When Kevin was born, his father was overjoyed. "It's going to be lively now," he said with a smile as he held Kevin, making me feel relieved. At that time, I had already lost my parents, so his words reminded me of them. And it felt as if they were also celebrating with us. Ted's father often told stories about Ted's childhood. Right after Ted was born, my wife seemed to struggle a lot. She might have been what you call postpartum depression now. When Ted cried, she often cried with him. So, I had to take care of him, feeding him milk. It was tough. Was Ted a child who cried a lot? Not really. Compared to my friends' children, he didn't cry much, but once he started, he wouldn't stop easily. It was tough on my wife. I see. But over time, my wife got better, and seeing Ted walk quickly. We both used to joke that this kid is a genius. As his father reminisced about the past, his eyes narrowed as if cherishing those times. I wondered if Ted would look back at our current times the same way in the future. Which warmed my heart. However, that was not the case. Enough with the old stories, said Ted as he took Kevin away from his father. It's time to feed him milk and put him to sleep, so you should go home. I was surprised by Ted's cold tone. When we were dating, they seemed like a close father and son. And even at dinners arranged to introduce me, they joked around with each other. I couldn't understand why Ted would say such things. I see. Maybe it's time for me to head back home then. Thank you for everything today, Lucy. His father lightly laughed and went home. Seeing his lonely figure, I approached Ted, who was preparing the milk. Hey, you don't need to be so harsh to your father. He's so happy to see us. Did you have Kevin for my father's sake? What are you talking about? Of course not. Then there's no need to worry about it. Hey, why are you in such a bad mood? It's nothing. You're just misunderstanding, Lucy. Ted said that, but I couldn't help but feel differently. I feel like this will lead to a falling out between them. And my unpleasant premonition came true. Following that event, Ted became colder towards his father, and perhaps because of that, his father seemed uncomfortable. Over the years, it worsened, and eventually, they stopped talking altogether. However, my father-in-law was considerate of me and often looked after Kevin. Spending time with my grandson feels like a dream. You must be busy with work too, right? Keep up the good work. He would say this, encouraging me. Ted and I both worked. And I often relied on my father-in-law, but I am grateful to him for willingly taking on the role. Yet, instead of showing gratitude, Ted remained silent. No matter how much I tried to mediate, he wouldn't listen. Moreover, as long as Dad leaves a proper will, that's all that matters. He seems to have saved up quite a bit. Hearing Ted laugh about this sent chills down my spine. I'm sorry, Father. Why would he say such things? Don't worry about it. I tried my best raising him though. It must be my fault, surely. That's not true. Well, I still have some time left. I'll do my best until the end. My father-in-law tried to stay positive about his relationship with Ted. However, when Kevin turned 20, my father-in-law fell ill. When Kevin visited his grandfather's house as usual, he found him collapsed. An ambulance was called immediately, and after various tests at the hospital, he was given 6 months to live. Surprised and saddened by the sudden news, I went to the hospital, intending to treat him as normal, but surprisingly, he waved at me cheerfully. How are you feeling, Father? Oh, it's nothing much. The doctors are probably just exaggerating, he said lightly. Though he should have received a detailed explanation from the doctor due to his wish. He's acting strong not to worry us. I felt tears welling up, but since he was smiling, I decided not to cry. With his agreement, treatment began. He had to be hospitalized long-term. Ted's attitude remained unchanged even after his father was hospitalized. I need to get him to make a will before he dies. Maybe I should contact a lawyer I know. Seeing Ted like this truly disgusted me. When I told him I would take care of his father, he was indifferent. Do whatever you want. Hearing that, I gave up expecting anything from Ted. Then, I moved some clothes and stayed at his father's house, which was conveniently located near both the hospital and my home. I lived a life shuttling daily between work, the hospital, and his father's house, carrying clothes for his father. Kevin, who had often been looked after by his grandfather, also visited daily after university or work. When cooking felt burdensome, we ate together at the house. During these meals, Kevin and I talked about various things like university, his part-time job, friends, and even his girlfriend. Wow, Kevin, you have a girlfriend now. Stop teasing me. I'm not teasing. Have you told Grandpa? No, I haven't told him. If you're okay with it, you should tell him. He would surely be happy. Huh? Why? Adults like to hear about these things. It makes them feel like their kids are growing up. That's weird. Kevin said this, but he didn't seem to mind the idea. I imagined how happy his grandfather would be to hear the news. Are you going to visit him tomorrow? I have work tomorrow, so I might not make the visiting hours. Maybe the day after. Is that so? I have to work that day. Could you take the change of clothes for Grandpa? You don't need to bring back the laundry. Okay, I got it. I'll get everything ready after we eat dinner. Thanks. As I watched Kevin's dependable actions, I felt proud. I believe this is because of the love we as parents couldn't give, which he received from others. The next day, I visited my father-in-law in the hospital. When I told him about Kevin, he smiled just as I had imagined he would. He's grown so much. Truly. It's all thanks to you, Father. No, you have done your best. Despite how Ted has been. Ted has tried, on his days off. While we were chatting like this, an unexpected visitor arrived. Hey, Dad. You haven't made a will yet, have you? I've brought a lawyer with me. Ted said this and introduced the person behind him. Unbelievably, he demanded that his father make a will right there and then. What are you saying? It's okay, Lucy. I felt anger at Ted's imperious behavior, and at the moment I raised my voice. My father-in-law quietly calmed me down. I couldn't say anything more, and just watched the situation unfold. Ted communicated the contents to his father, who filled them in accordingly. After confirming everything, he nodded, handed it to the lawyer. Ted seemed satisfied, and left the hospital alone, leaving everything else to the lawyer. As I puzzled over what to do. Excuse me. What is it? Please discard that. What? But. I'll pay the fees myself. Or has he already paid you? Not yet. I thought so. He probably said I would pay. My father-in-law chuckled cheerfully, as I watched him, stunned. As a parent, I need to teach him a lesson. A month later, my father-in-law's condition suddenly worsened, and he passed away. Since the day Ted brought that lawyer, he hadn't visited at all. I handled all the funeral preparations by myself, and I was the chief mourner. Initially, I was going to put Ted's name, but Mom took care of him till the end, so it should be in her name. Encouraged by Kevin's words, many people attended the funeral with tears in their eyes. The attendees shared stories of the past with my father-in-law and both my son. And I couldn't hold back our tears as we shared the grief of his departure with many others. Despite informing him, Ted didn't show up at all. I gave up expecting anything from him. The wake, the funeral, the cremation, I handled them all smoothly with Kevin. I informed Ted that I would continue to offer prayers at my father-in-law's home for a while, But there was no reply from him. While I was spending time at my father-in-law's house. Hello. It was sudden. Of course, there had been no contact. I hadn't seen Ted since my father-in-law was hospitalized. Ted, whom I met after a long time, had changed his appearance. His previously unkempt hair was now fashionably cut and shaved at the nape. He wore no glasses, and his plain polo shirt was replaced with a brightly colored dress shirt. His pants were no longer baggy but were skinny, emphasizing his figure. And from behind him. Hello. A woman in a short dress above the knee, wearing a light-colored outfit, emerged. What? Suddenly you feel like seeing your own father, doesn't seem like it. I wouldn't do such a thing, you know. I see, then, what are you here for? And who is this person? She's my girlfriend. We came to talk about the will and inheritance. I see. While holding arms with the woman, Ted made a call to the lawyer. I texted Kevin to explain the situation briefly and asked him to come. Soon after, both the lawyer and Kevin arrived almost simultaneously. After quick greetings, the lawyer, Ted, and his woman, Kevin, and I took our seats, and Ted began to speak. I'm marrying this woman, so we're getting a divorce. I'll pay you alimony. There's not a penny left, though? What? Well, maybe you should check what's in the will then. Hey. Read it out now. Ted, panicking, urged the lawyer to proceed. The contents of the will disclosed by the lawyer were: the monetary assets in the bank account shall be inherited by Lucy, my son's wife, and their son, Kevin. All the real estate properties, including land and houses registered in my name, shall be inherited by Lucy. Hearing this, Ted began to tremble violently. What does this mean? Exactly as you heard. It's your father's will. This is wrong. The will I had him make was supposed to leave everything to me. Why is everything being inherited by you? Hey. You're the lawyer, right? What's going on? Ted's anger, initially directed at me, now turned towards the lawyer. Naturally, from his perspective, it was inevitable since his request wasn't followed, but the gentleman reissued his instructions. You hadn't paid me any fee. And you mentioned he would pay, right? Therefore, I prioritized his request over yours. What have you been doing without telling me? It was the client's wish. I was merely adhering to confidentiality obligations. The lawyer stated calmly. Ted stumbled over his words, not having paid the fees himself. However, realizing he would not inherit anything, he directed his anger back at me. Why do you get everything? You're just a stranger. You thief. That thief took care of your father until the end. I also arranged his funeral. What were you doing while your father was suffering? You didn't even visit. That's irrelevant. He was my father. You should have valued him more then. It's too late to start shouting now. You stupid woman. In the heat of the argument, Ted raised his hand to strike me for the first time. I braced for the impact, closing my eyes tightly, but the blow never came. When I cautiously opened my eyes, my son had stepped between us and was holding Ted's arm. What are you doing, Dad? Let go. There's no way I'd let go when you're about to hit Mom. My son dragged Ted to the wall and pinned him there. I never hated you, Dad. But now I despise you. You mistreated Grandpa, cheated with another woman, and now you're about to hit Mom. What are you even doing? It's none of your business. Dad, Since Mom moved here, you've been bringing that woman to our house, right? I knew about it. How did you know? I dropped by the house worried about you, and saw you two holding hands, looking cozy. I even have photos. Make sure you pay Mom a proper alimony. This can't be. Ted collapsed in despair. However, the woman was nowhere to be seen. It seemed she had run off after realizing the situation was bad. But with my son by my side and the lawyer's assistance, I managed to settle everything. As Kevin had pointed out, while I was busy caregiving, Ted had moved the woman in and lived together. He even told neighbors they were remarried. This helped to gather solid evidence of Ted's affair. We also found videos and photos of their intimate moments stored on Ted's computer. It turned out the affair had been going on not just since I started caregiving, but for 5 years. I wasn't devastated by the revelation. Instead, I quietly acknowledged that our marriage had ended long ago. I proceeded with the property division and filed for divorce while claiming alimony. Ted resisted initially, but when I threatened to discuss his infidelity with his company, he reluctantly agreed and paid up quickly. The affair partner had fled, but I extracted information from Ted, confronted her parents, and made them apologize to me. Her parents were furious about the affair, ensuring she would feel the repercussions at home. By the way, I moved to a small apartment, and the spacious house left by my father-in-law, due to its prime residential location, was transformed into a daycare and cafe. I quit my job to run the facility, aiming to support local parents raising their children, just as my father-in-law had supported and helped raise my son with me.
My name is Madeline, and 12 years ago, I met James at a business networking event. He was a senior manager at a trading company, charming and intelligent, with kind eyes that made me feel at ease. What really won me over, though, was how he talked about his 13-year-old daughter, Sarah. The love in his voice when he mentioned her name was unmistakable. I'd built my chain of beauty salons from the ground up, and success had brought me everything except what I wanted most, a family. I couldn't have children of my own, a fact I'd learned to live with, but meeting James and Sarah felt like a second chance. We got married 6 months later, and they moved into my house. The income difference between James and me was substantial. I made several times what he did, but it never bothered me. Love isn't about money, and I was just happy to finally have the family I'd always wanted. When Sarah turned 16, I bought her first car, a safe, reliable model that made her squeal with joy. "This is really mine," she'd asked, tears in her eyes as she hugged me. "Thank you, Madeline. You're the best." 2 years later, when college acceptance letters started arriving, I didn't hesitate to offer to pay for her education. It wasn't Harvard, but it was a good school, and Sarah was thrilled. Those early years were beautiful. We were happy. I had everything I'd ever wanted, a loving husband, a stepdaughter who seemed to appreciate me, and a home filled with laughter. Sarah even stayed with us after college, saying she wanted to save money while starting her career. I'll never forget that spring evening when Sarah came home, practically glowing with excitement. She'd been dating Michael for 2 years, and I knew him well, a decent young man who worked as a software engineer and treated her like a princess. Still, when she burst through the door waving her left hand with a diamond ring sparkling on it, I was genuinely surprised. "Dad, Madeline," he proposed, she squealed, bouncing on her toes like she was 16 again instead of 25. "We're getting married." James jumped up to hug her while I stood there grinning like an idiot. This was exactly the kind of family moment I'd always dreamed of having. Michael came over later that evening, and we opened a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for a special occasion. "I know this is a big ask," Sarah said, looking nervous as she played with her engagement ring. "But we've been looking at venues and everything, and—" "How much?" I asked, already reaching for my phone to check my accounts. "Well, with everything included, around 150,000, she said quietly, then rushed to add, "But of course, we don't expect." "Done," I interrupted, smiling. "I'll set up an account tomorrow that you can access for all the wedding expenses." The look of relief and joy on her face made every penny worth it. "Really? Oh my God, Madeline, thank you so much." She threw her arms around me, and I hugged her back tightly, remembering that teenage girl who'd first welcomed me into her life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of excitement. Sarah included me in everything at first. We'd sit at the kitchen table late into the night, looking at wedding magazines and Pinterest boards. She'd text me pictures of dresses she was considering and ask my opinion on color schemes. "What do you think about these flowers?" she'd ask, showing me photos of elaborate bouquets. "Too much? Not enough?" "I love the pink peonies," I'd say, and she'd make notes in her wedding planner. She found her dream dress, a stunning designer gown that cost more than my first car, and I didn't even blink at the price tag. The way her eyes lit up when she tried it on was worth every cent. The venue she chose was spectacular, an elegant historic hotel downtown with crystal chandeliers and marble floors. The menu she selected featured premium dishes that would impress any food critic. I transferred the money as promised, and Sarah dove into the planning with enthusiasm. But then, about 2 months into the planning, something shifted. The detailed updates became shorter, vaguer. Instead of our long planning sessions, she'd rush through dinner and disappear into her room or go to Michael's place. "How's the planning going?" I'd ask. Fine, she'd reply, barely looking up from her phone. Everything's on track. When I'd try to get more specific details, she'd give non-committal answers. Oh, just finalizing some things. Or, don't worry, it's all under control. I told myself not to be hurt by this gradual exclusion. After all, planning a wedding is stressful, and she was probably just overwhelmed. Maybe she needed some space to make her own decisions. I remembered being young and wanting to prove I could handle things on my own. James noticed my concern one night as we got ready for bed. "Everything okay?" he asked. "You seem worried." "I'm probably just being silly," I said, trying to smile. "It's just, Sarah seems different lately. More distant." "She's just busy with the wedding," he assured me, kissing my forehead. "You know how it is, so many details to manage. Try not to worry." I nodded and tried to push my concerns aside. But there was a nagging feeling in my gut that something wasn't quite right. The happy bubble we'd been living in felt like it was starting to develop tiny cracks, and I couldn't shake the sensation that this was just the beginning. As the weeks passed, I decided to take a more active role in the wedding planning again. One morning, over coffee, I casually brought up something that had been on my mind. "Sarah, honey, I was wondering about the guest list," I said, watching her scroll through her phone. "Have you figured out how many people you're inviting?" She looked up briefly. "Oh, yeah, we're keeping it small, about 50 people." "That's nice, intimate," I nodded, then added, "I'd love to include my parents and my sister. They've always adored you, and they'd be thrilled to be there." The change in Sarah's expression was immediate and startling. Her face hardened, and she put down her phone with deliberate slowness. "Actually, we're only inviting close relatives and friends. This is supposed to be a really personal celebration. I don't want to include people who aren't, actually family." The words hit me like ice water. After 12 years, after everything we'd shared, my family wasn't actually family to her? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Sarah, I understand wanting to keep things intimate, but my parents have known you since you were 13. They'd been to every one of your birthdays, your graduation." I paused, then added quietly, "And I am paying for the entire wedding. Surely we can make an exception for 3 people who care about you." Her face immediately twisted into a pout, and I could see the anger flash in her eyes at the mention of money. She pushed her chair back from the table with more force than necessary. "Fine," she snapped. "I'll send invitations to your mom and sister. Happy now?" Before I could respond, she grabbed her phone and stormed out of the kitchen. I heard the front door slam a few minutes later. That evening, James came into our bedroom with that look on his face, the one that told me I wasn't going to like what he had to say. "We need to talk about what happened with Sarah today," he began, sitting on the edge of our bed. "Okay," I said, putting down my book. "What about it?" "She called me crying earlier. Said you were really rude to her about the guest list. She's staying at Michael's tonight because she's so upset." I stared at him in disbelief. "Rude to her?" "James, she told me my family wasn't welcome at her wedding, a wedding I'm paying for, by the way. And I stayed completely calm when I talked to her about it." "I know, but maybe you could be a little more gentle with her," he suggested. "She's under a lot of stress with the wedding planning." I explained exactly what had happened, word for word, and I could see him processing it. He ran his hand through his hair, something he always did when he was troubled. "Okay," he finally said. "I see what you mean. I'll talk to her about it tomorrow." The next 2 weeks passed in an uneasy peace. Sarah had returned home and was acting as if nothing had happened, chattering about wedding details over breakfast and asking my opinion about centerpieces again. But something felt off, like the calm before a storm. Then came the bombshell at dinner. "So," Sarah said, pushing her pasta around her plate, "Mom found out about the wedding. She's back in town." I nearly choked on my wine. James's fork clattered against his plate. In 12 years, Sarah's mother, Linda, had barely been mentioned in our house. I knew the basics. She'd had a drinking problem, which led to the divorce, then moved to Arizona and essentially abandoned Sarah. No birthday cards, no Christmas calls, nothing. "She really wants to be involved in the wedding planning," Sarah continued, her voice bright with an enthusiasm I couldn't understand. "Actually, I invited her over for dinner this weekend. Here." My hand tightened around my wine glass. This was my house, the house I'd bought with my own money, the house where I'd created a home for us all. The proper thing would have been for Sarah to ask permission before inviting someone over, especially someone with Linda's history. But I remembered the guest list argument and bit my tongue. One more confrontation wasn't worth it. James sat there silently, suddenly very interested in his pasta. That weekend, I spent hours preparing a perfect dinner: herb-crusted rack of lamb, roasted vegetables, homemade bread. I wanted everything to be flawless, though I couldn't explain why I felt the need to impress a woman who'd abandoned her daughter. Linda arrived exactly 30 minutes late. She was tall and blonde like Sarah, but with hard edges where Sarah was soft. Her eyes scanned every inch of my home as she walked in, lingering on the artwork, the furniture, the view from the windows. I recognized the look, envy poorly disguised as appraisal. "What a large house," she said, emphasizing large in a way that made it sound like an insult. Dinner started pleasantly enough, but it didn't stay that way. Linda took a bite of the lamb and pursed her lips. She said, cutting another piece with deliberate slowness. "You know, I always made this with rosemary and garlic. It really brings out the flavor better. Sarah used to love it when I made it." I took a sip of wine and said nothing. "And these vegetables," she continued, pushing them around her plate. "They're a bit overdone, aren't they? I always found that keeping them crispy makes them so much more appetizing." With each criticism, I waited for James to say something, anything. He'd been married to this woman, he knew exactly who she was and what she was doing. But he kept his eyes on his plate, cutting his food into smaller and smaller pieces. I sat there, watching this woman criticize my cooking in my own home, while my husband stayed silent and my stepdaughter beamed at her long-lost mother as if she'd hung the moon. Something inside me shifted, hardened. As dinner wound down, Linda dabbed her lips with her napkin and turned to Sarah. "So, honey, tell me about the venue. Which hotel did you pick?" "The Grand Morrison downtown," Sarah replied, brightening at the change of subject. "It's beautiful, Mom. They have these amazing crystal chandeliers and—" "The Grand Morrison?" Linda's face wrinkled with distaste. "Oh, sweetie, you can't have your wedding there. That place is so basic. Now, the Belmont Plaza, that's where you should be having it. Much more prestigious." I gripped my fork tighter, knowing the Belmont Plaza cost nearly twice what we were already spending. "The wedding we're planning isn't exactly cheap," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "The Grand Morrison is a lovely venue." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Well, you can't cut corners on your only daughter's wedding. It's the most important day of her life." Something inside me snapped. 12 years of love, support, and financial sacrifice reduced to cutting corners by a woman who hadn't sent her daughter so much as a birthday card. "If you're so concerned about the venue," I said, meeting her gaze directly, "feel free to pay for the Belmont Plaza yourself. Since I'm the one covering the entire $150,000 for this wedding, I think the Grand Morrison will do just fine." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face flushed red. She stood up so quickly, her chair scraped against the floor. "I can see I'm not welcome here," she announced, grabbing her purse. "Sarah, call me tomorrow, honey." She stormed out, the front door slamming behind her. Sarah whirled on me, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you?" she screamed. "How dare you throw the money in Mom's face like that? You're cruel and greedy, and you've ruined everything." She ran upstairs, and I heard her door slam too. I sat there, stunned, as James helped himself to another glass of wine. Later that night, he came to our bedroom looking stern. "You need to apologize to Sarah," he said. "What you said to Linda was completely out of line." I stared at him in disbelief. "Apologize? For what? Telling the truth? Your ex-wife came into my house, criticized everything I did, and then suggested I was being cheap about a wedding I'm paying for entirely on my own. Still, you didn't have to embarrass her like that. And now Sarah's upset." "I'm not apologizing," I said firmly. "Not this time." He grabbed his pillow. "Fine. I'll sleep in the living room until you come to your senses." The next morning, my phone rang while I was making coffee alone in the kitchen. It was my mother. "Maddie, honey," she said, her voice concerned. "I wanted to ask you about Sarah's wedding. What's the date and venue? Dad and I haven't received an invitation yet, and neither has Jenny. I thought they must have gotten lost in the mail." I sat at the kitchen counter for hours after my mother's call, my coffee going cold beside me. The morning sun crawled across the floor as I waited, my anger building with each passing minute. Around 11, I heard Sarah's key in the lock. She'd been out since breakfast, probably with Linda. "Sarah," I called out, my voice steady, despite the rage simmering inside me. "We need to talk." She walked into the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes. "What is it?" she asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "I just got a call from my mother," I said, watching her face carefully. She was asking about the wedding invitations, the ones that apparently never arrived. Sarah's expression hardened, a look I'd never seen before crossing her face. She lifted her chin defiantly. "I'm not inviting them." "Excuse me?" "I'm not inviting strangers to my wedding," she said, each word deliberately cruel. The word strangers hit me like a physical blow. My parents had been at every Christmas, every birthday, every milestone for 12 years. My sister had helped Sarah prepare for her college interviews. "Strangers?" "That's wrong, Sarah," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "And it's ugly. These people have loved you and supported you for years." She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound I'd never heard from her before. "You want to talk about ugly? After what you did to my mom last night?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "Actually, you know what? I don't want you at my wedding either." Time seemed to stop. The kitchen fell silent except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator. 12 years of love, support, and sacrifice reduced to this moment. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You don't want me, the person paying for your entire wedding, to attend?" "That's right," she said, lifting her chin higher. I felt an odd sense of calm wash over me. All the hurt and anger of the past few weeks crystallized into perfect clarity. I smiled, which seemed to unnerve her slightly. "That's fine," I said, my voice pleasantly light. "I won't come to your wedding." Without another word, I walked upstairs to my home office. My hands didn't shake at all as I logged into my banking app and revoked Sarah's access to the wedding account. It took less than a minute, just a few clicks to end what had taken 12 years to build. Next, I called Robert, the wedding planner. He answered on the second ring. "Robert, this is Madeline Harrison. I need you to cancel all the wedding arrangements." Excuse me? He sounded bewildered. Is everything all right? No, it's not, I said honestly. But it will be. Please cancel everything and process the refund to my account. The Grand Morrison was my next call. The events manager was apologetic but firm. They couldn't refund the deposit for the food and beverages that had already been ordered. It was a few $1,000s lost, but at that moment, it felt like money well spent. That evening, the house was silent. James was still sleeping in the living room. I could hear him shifting on the couch as I got ready for bed. As I lay there alone in the dark, I realized I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt free. The next morning, I took my time getting dressed. I chose my favorite blue silk blouse and pearl earrings, armor, for what I knew would be a difficult day. When I finally went downstairs for breakfast, the storm broke immediately. Sarah and James were already at the kitchen table, clearly waiting for me. The moment I appeared, Sarah leaped to her feet, her face red with fury. "What did you do?" she screamed. "How dare you cancel my wedding? How dare you block my access to the account? That money was for my wedding." I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hand steady. "I'm not going to sponsor a wedding I'm not invited to," I said simply, taking a sip. "You can't do this." Sarah's voice rose higher, tears starting to stream down her face. "You've ruined everything. The venue, the flowers, the dress, it's all gone." I set my coffee cup down carefully. "Actually, I can do this," and I did. "Why don't you ask the people you actually want at your wedding to pay for it?" Sarah's face crumpled. She let out a horrible, gasping sob and ran from the kitchen. Her footsteps thundered up the stairs, followed by the slam of her bedroom door. James stood up slowly, his face dark with anger. "Fix this," he growled. "Right now. Call everyone back, reopen the account, and arrange everything again. Or I'll file for divorce." The threat hung in the air between us. 12 years of marriage reduced to this moment. I looked at the man I'd loved, really looked at him, and wondered how I'd never seen this side of him before. "Okay," I said calmly. "File for divorce, I'm not against it." The color drained from his face. He clearly hadn't expected this response. "Madeline, you can't be serious." "I am. And since this is my house, I'd like you and Sarah to leave by tomorrow." His anger deflated like a punctured balloon. "Look," he said, his tone suddenly conciliatory, "I overreacted. We need to talk about this, think it through." "I've already thought it through," I interrupted. "I'm done living with people who don't appreciate or respect me. I'm done trying to buy love." The rest of the day passed in a blur of slammed doors and muffled arguments upstairs. At exactly 7 that evening, James and Sarah appeared in the foyer with their suitcases. Sarah's eyes were red and puffy from crying. "I never thought you could be so cruel," she spat. I felt a laugh bubble up inside me, a genuine laugh of disbelief. "Cruel? I paid for your clothes, your car, your education. I gave you a home, loved you like my own daughter, and was ready to spend $150,000 on your wedding. And you have the nerve to call me cruel, because I won't let you treat me like dirt." The door closed behind them with a quiet click, so much gentler than all the angry slams of the past few days. I stood in my foyer, and listened to the silence of my house. The house felt different after they left, lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had been lifted. I spent the first few days reorganizing spaces, reclaiming rooms that had slowly become filled with Sarah's things over the years. It was therapeutic, like cleaning out an old wound. Then came the message from Michael's mother. It popped up on my social media one evening while I was enjoying a glass of wine on my patio. "I hope you realize what you've done," the message read. This wedding could fail entirely because of your actions. How can you be so heartless? I took my time responding, choosing my words carefully. I'm not heartless, I wrote back. I'm just done being disrespected. I won't pay for a wedding I'm not even invited to. If you're so concerned about the wedding's success, feel free to pay for it yourself. She read the message, but never replied. I imagined her sitting there, probably as shocked as James had been that I wouldn't back down. It's funny how people react when you finally stand up for yourself, like they can't quite believe you've stopped playing by their rules. I contacted my lawyer the next day. She'd helped me draft the prenup 12 years ago, and now she'd helped me end the marriage it had protected. The divorce papers were ready within a week. When I called James to tell him they were ready, he tried his old tactics again. "Maddie, please," he said, his voice soft and pleading, the voice that used to make my heart melt. "We can start over. We can fix this." I hung up. He came to get the papers the next morning. He looked older somehow, tired. The competent man who'd threatened me with divorce was gone, replaced by someone who seemed lost. "Sarah's been crying nonstop," he said, standing in my foyer, no longer our foyer. "The wedding's going to be at City Hall now. No reception, no flowers, no fancy dress. Just a basic ceremony." I shrugged, remembering all the tears I'd shed over their betrayal. "That's not my problem." "How can you be so cold about this?" "It's not cold, James. It's just not my responsibility anymore." He took the papers and left. I watched him walk to his car, the car I'd bought him, and drive away. It felt final, but not sad. Just finished. The divorce was completed 2 months later. The prenup made everything simple. He couldn't touch my house, my business, or any of my assets. Sometimes I wondered if he'd ever really read that document, if he'd understood what it meant when he signed it 12 years ago. It didn't matter now. People ask me sometimes if I know how Sarah's wedding went. If she wore the dress she'd chosen, if Linda was there, if it was everything she'd dreamed of. I honestly don't know. I blocked them all on social media, changed my phone number, moved on with my life. What I do know is this: you can't buy love. Not real love, anyway. You can't purchase respect or gratitude or loyalty. I spent 12 years trying to build a family with my checkbook, and in the end, all it got me was a front row seat to watch that family choose someone else over me. But here's the thing about endings: they're also beginnings. My house is peaceful now. My business is thriving. And when I sit in my garden with my morning coffee, watching the sun rise over my flowers, I don't feel lonely. I feel free.